Emotional intelligence is an important concept for those looking to develop their leadership. First, we want to define what we mean by emotional intelligence, as well as have a brief discussion on the nature of emotions and why they aren't as mysterious as we often treat them.
There are a lot of people that might have the same technical competence, that might have the same education, might have the same experience, and yet there's one person that rises above another in an organization. In my estimation, the things that we'll be talking about today, emotional intelligence and its subsidiary components that we'll be discussing, are what make that person advance and arise. And that's why we've got a star here symbolizing because I think people with emotional intelligence are the people that become stars in our organizations. I really believe that. So this is what we're going to be talking about specifically. And I will tell you, we're going to be primarily using Daniel Goleman's model. He published a book in 1995, very popular, New York Times bestseller, just called Emotional Intelligence. I would recommend to you something called Working with Emotional Intelligence, or even another book he collaborated on called Primal Leadership, I should say. We're also going to be using a couple of other professors named Caruso and Salave. They were a little more scientific with emotional intelligence, but we're going to be using their model as well. So we're going to be talking about self-awareness, self-management, empathy, and social skills. We're going to be spending our morning talking about these four components. Now you'll notice self-awareness and self-management are more inwardly focused, and empathy and social skills are more outwardly focused. Okay, and emotional intelligence encompasses both of these elements, looking inward as well as being emotionally intelligent and aware outside of ourselves and with the people that we work with in this case. So here's a definition from Emily Starrett, who wrote a book on emotional intelligence. She says it refers to the array of personal management and social skills that allows one to succeed in the workplace and life in general. I buy that definition. I like it. Like I said, I think it does allow us to be successful in the workplace and in life in general. And finally, another definition here from Working with Emotional Intelligence. Leadership is almost all emotional intelligence. Now, you would expect that kind of definition from a book with that title, but I think you'll see as we discuss these things this morning that developing your own emotional intelligence is going to do nothing but help your career, and if we believe Emily Starrett here, emotional intelligence is going to help us in other areas of our life as well. Okay. Now, here are some important concepts that we're going to talk about today. Some frameworks for our discussion. First is emotions are not unanalyzable sort of primaries or these concepts that we experience that are the consequences of ideas stored in the subconscious. Okay, we can actually bring our emotions out to the front. We can analyze them, and because we can analyze them, and because there are antecedent things happening before we feel emotions, we can control them. We can engage or disengage from them as appropriate to the context and what it is that we're trying to accomplish. Okay, emotions seem automatic, like I just mentioned, but they can be changed by changing the inputs. There are antecedents or inputs that give us certain emotions, right? And we can alter those things. We can change those inputs that can help us better manage and appropriately utilize our emotions, right? For years. We're going to spend a lot of time at various stages of our discussion today talking about the conflict between reason and emotion. There isn't one, right? These two there's been a false dichotomy for centuries now. It's called the mind-body conflict. It shouldn't exist. It's this idea of gut feelings versus the reason and rationality in my mind, or a broken heart versus the reason and rationality I feel in my mind. Emotions stem from cognition. Okay, emotion and reason work together if we handle them appropriately to make us more effective professionally, as leaders, and socially. Okay. The other thing here, very related to the previous point, is emotions don't compel action. Okay, everyone has the power to make choices in the face of emotional responses. Okay, even when that choice is taking no action. In other words, it is the person that is unsuccessful in life, that only acts on impulses. You know people like this. Many criminals are people that have no control over their emotions, but any impulse they feel, they have to act on it. okay? This is just not the case. You and I can develop a capacity for managing our emotions more effectively, and this is a major part of emotional intelligence. And then I think importantly here, helpfully balancing emotion and reason is important to leadership success. In fact, I want to ask a question right now, and there's a reason we're not giving you a third option, or else everyone after what we've just said would say, well, both. But I want to ask you, what is the role, the primary role of a leader? Is it primarily emotional, or is it primarily rational? Okay, I want you to think about that. Is a leader's role primarily emotional, or is it primarily rational? There's much debate on this in the leadership literature and the emotional intelligence literature. I'd like to know what your thoughts are. Looks like we've got 73% saying rational and 27% saying emotional. That is really interesting to me. To be honest with you, I thought we would get the opposite split. About a quarter saying rational and 75% or so saying emotional. That's really good. This is going to make for some awesome discussion after the webinar, okay, on our LinkedIn site. This is really good, okay. Look at this, okay, and this is sort of why we cheated. This is from a textbook I've taught out of. Judge and Robbins are the author. He says, we must have the ability to experience emotions to be rational. Why? Because our emotions provide important information about how we understand the world around us. Now, those that have had leadership courses from me before have seen this quote, but our primary example for this, and some of you have heard of this example before, is Phineas Gage. Okay, Phineas Gage, 1848, was a railroad worker, I believe, in Maine, had a railroad spike, 3-foot long railroad spike. There was an explosion that got blasted through his brain. He survived, remarkably enough, and what they found out is that the cognitive part of his brain, the rational part of his brain, or what we would think would be the rational part, was untouched, undamaged. He knew everything there was no memory loss, anything like that, still could reason, et cetera, at least for a while. What was impacted was the emotional center of his brain. And what they found was that he started making, as time went on, he started making more and more irrational choices because he didn't have the emotional part of his brain to inform the cognitive side, and so he didn't really have rationality. Does that make sense? It's really kind of a fascinating thing, and this has been replicated by neuroscientists over and over. And we're not just relying on something from 1848, but we actually, our emotions and our cognition work together to make us rational. Okay, it's really kind of a fascinating thing. Now, I want to give you just really quickly here a couple more examples, or one more example of what we mean by emotional intelligence. I love this example from Ronald Reagan, and Ronald Reagan was shot, I believe it was 1981. Hinckley was the guy that tried to assassinate Reagan. And what was interesting, two examples from this. First, when Reagan was being wheeled into surgery, think about this. He's just been shot, and he looks up at the surgeons, and he says, boy, I hope you guys are Republicans. Okay? To be able to have that kind of control despite the context and despite the emotions that most of us would be feeling tends to be impressive to us. Okay? The other one, of course, is Lincoln's numbers were actually really good after he was shot. This is not uncommon. Okay? We tend to lionize those that are leaders that have gone through some kind of trial, and Lincoln was shot, and so his numbers were awesome. His pollster, though, Richard Worthland, noticed that his numbers, after enough time had passed after the assassination attempt, that his numbers were dropping precipitously, okay, pretty rapidly, and he was really worried. He was really nervous about this, and was kind of scared to bring it to his boss, the president. And he told Reagan, went to a meeting in the Oval Office and said, we got a problem. Your numbers are dropping, and Reagan was unfazed. And in fact, Reagan just kind of laughed and said, Dick, don't worry about it. I'll just go out there and get shot again. Okay, and Richard Worthland remembers hearing this and just being like, wow, this is a different character here. And I would attribute that to some sort of, that being able to have that sort of self-deprecation to some sort of emotional intelligence, okay? Being able to hear the disappointing news of having your numbers dip, having gone through a trial and a difficult circumstance like being shot, and still be able to manage it so that you're helping to manage the emotions of those around you. In one case, the surgeons, to sort of put them at ease with your sense of humor, and then, again, your subordinate who's you can tell is nervous about speaking to you, okay? So really quickly here, let's talk about what emotions are, right? Because let's talk about what we mean by this, okay? Emotions are the form in which one's experiences automatic experiences, and they make subconscious value judgments, okay? So emotions are value judgments. Does that make sense? And to be honest with you, until I read Edwin Locke, I had never really thought of it that way. So this sort of happens automatically, and I want to take you to this process by which we experience emotions. Okay, I want you to think about this, right? Our pattern here is going to be object, which leads to cognition, the way we think about something. Then we make a value appraisal, and that leads to an emotion. Let me give you an example here. So let's say the object is a lion. Our senses see a lion. Let's say we're out in the Kenyan wilderness somewhere or something, South African or Kenyan wilderness, whatever it might be. It actually is cognition that kicks in. Whatever our perception of the object is, plus our context. So I'm not nervous, I'm not fearful if I see the lion at a zoo, if my cognition tells me, oh, the context is safe, it's fine. But I'm alone out in the Kenyan wilderness, okay? And I see a lion, right? And maybe this lion is walking towards me, right? So I perceive something about that. Any stored knowledge I have about that object. Look, I'm not a dummy. I know lions are dangerous. Then I make a value appraisal here. What's at risk? What am I afraid of losing? What am I hopeful of gaining? In this case, I am fearful, probably. My value appraisal is I value my life immensely. Okay, now this is obviously a very simplistic example, but so what emotion am I going to feel? I'm going to feel fear, serious fear, okay? Now let's take, and what's my likely action? My likely reaction is I'm going to bolt, right? I'm going to get out of there. Think about this in a work environment, okay? Let's say that I perceive something. Now an object can be a thing, a person, an action, an event, an idea, a memory, a previous emotion even. So let's say I'm in a meeting and I propose something. One of my peers says, you know what, that's a really dumb idea, Dan. You know what, that's stupid. I kind of wish you'd stop suggesting things in these meetings because they're always kind of silly. Now, what cognition happens there? I perceive the object, in this case, plus the context in which it happened. And I'm thinking, okay, this person is trying to make me look bad, or they are making me look bad in front of bosses. What's my value appraisal? Okay, I'm thinking like I really value my job and the esteem that I'm held in and my reputation in my work environment and in front of my superiors, right? What emotion am I likely to feel? Maybe a combination of some emotions, maybe embarrassment, maybe resentment, maybe I'm hurt, maybe I'm angry at this coworker. Now remember what we said earlier, still at this stage, you and I, those of us that have developed this self-discipline, are in a position, even though I'm feeling angry or embarrassed, I am in a position to handle it appropriately if I go about it the right way. Now, the non-emotionally intelligent employee or leader in this case might simply lash out or might respond back or might be a shrinking violet and be so embarrassed that they just let this person, quote-unquote,